We are joined on this episode by a filmmaker, a director and a writer behind horror shorts The Babysitter Murders and The Root of the Problem, which starred recent guest of the program, Bria Grant. His latest feature, the killer horror anthology The Mortuary Collection, starring the great Clancy Brown, is now streaming on Shudder. He is Ryan Spindell. Ryan, thank you so much for joining us here, sir.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, super excited to talk to you about the Mortuary Collection, which I really enjoyed. But before we get into the films, we always kind of start this by, the typical, how did you get into the film industry? So was it a particular piece of pop culture or a TV show that really, gave you a bug and kind of set you on the path towards filmmaking?
I kind of came to it a little bit late. It's so funny. I think about this question a lot because the other day I was listening to a podcast and there was a filmmaker and they were like, oh, how did you come to it? And they were like, well, I saw Jurassic Park when I was a kid and that inspired me. And so then I got begged my parents to get a camera and my dad got me one finally and the rest is history. And I was like listening to that podcast and I was thinking, what a cliche answer. But then I was like, I've given that answer like 3 times. But it's not Jurassic Park. It's like Poltergeist or something. Some sort of Spielbergian movie that inspired. And then, you get a camera and you just go for it. And I think that every kid does that. I think every kid gets a camera and screws around with it. And so I was trying to think like, what's the real answer about how I came to film? And I realized that as much as I would love to have been like a Spielberg prodigy where I was making really epic things as a kid, I don't think I came to it until after I graduated college. And the reason is up until college and in college, I always said I wanted to be a filmmaker, but I didn't really know what that meant. I just thought it seemed cool. And right after I graduated, from undergrad, I was sort of like sitting in my room one day and I had no job. And I was like, what am I going to do? How am I going to be a filmmaker here in North Florida where nobody makes movies? And I got on, I don't think it was Mandy. Maybe it was Craigslist or it was some sort of equivalent of that type of thing back in the day. And I saw this ad for an independent film that was shooting up in New Hampshire the next day. And I was in Florida. So I emailed them right away and I said, hey, I'd love to work on this film. I'll do anything. And he said, well, come on over. We start tomorrow morning. And I was like, I can be there in 24 hours. And so he said, well, come on up. We'll wait for you. We'll start shooting. Just meet us here and we'll go. And so I jumped in my car like within 15 minutes and I was driving up the East Coast. And I arrived at this little tiny town in New Hampshire. And this guy was shooting this kind of insane vanity project. He was, I would say he was probably in his late 30s, but he was shooting this movie where he was the lead and he was playing a 21-year-old heartthrob movie star. And he had a crew of about 8 people from all over the country who had sort of come up there to make this thing. And he was shooting on 35 millimeter, which is really crazy. And we were all getting paid nothing. And he put us all in this cabin in the woods and it was snowing and there was no heater in the cabin. So we were all sitting around this like fireplace in New Hampshire, like 8 people from all across the country, from like California to DC to Florida. And the age range was like, I think the oldest guy was probably late 30s. And the youngest was a girl who was 17, I think, which is crazy now that I think about it. And we were just sitting around and we were kind of complaining about this guy and also like laughing and just having such an amazing time. And I remember I had this surreal moment where I looked around the room and I was looking at sort of these people from all these different backgrounds and different ages who all felt like totally simpatico, like they just all felt like family, and I just met them that day. And I just had this like really surreal moment where I thought to myself, if making movies means that I get to spend the rest of my life being around people like this, then this is what I want to do. And I shot that, ended up working on that crazy thing for like 3 weeks or something. And I immediately drove back down to Florida and just kind of stopped drinking beer with my friends, stopped going out, wasting my life, which is what I was doing prior. And I just started being fully committed to film and filmmaking, and I started volunteering at the FSU Film School, and I was volunteering on 7 or 8 films a week, and I never turned back.
So that story makes up for the lack of, it was Jaws or it was Alien or it was Lost World. So that's a killer, way in. I mean, I think that more than makes up for not having that eureka moment of some movie gave you the bug. Yeah. But I was about to ask you which college, if it was FSU or not, because that seems to have been a hotbed for people like, Justin Vincent and Aaron Moorhead and some others have come out of there who make some genre films nowadays.
I did. I went to school with Aaron. We worked on a bunch of projects together, Aaron and I.
Oh, very cool.
Awesome.
Now, you said you went there wanting to be a filmmaker, but was that not the trade you went in for as far as like getting a degree?
No, so I went to FSU for basically fine art. So I got my degree in graphic design and photography. I sort of had two majors. And I always sort of danced around film, but like in a very non-committal way that I think even when I was in college, the path of filmmaking didn't seem like a real true path. So I kind of always said on the surface level I wanted to be a filmmaker, but really I was sort of focusing on art. And interestingly, I'm really glad that I took that path because everything that I was learning then, all the projects I was doing, all of that sort of fine art background has been a huge asset, I think, sort of retrospectively in my career.
Yeah, I always find that some of the most interesting filmmakers I know have backgrounds in other art forms. And, filmmaking is definitely one of those mediums that fuses almost all of the arts, right? You have music and you have the fine art with like the production design, the graphic design elements that go into the props, on the milk cartons in the movies, like just all of those elements really come together. So I think it only, boosts or increases your skill set.
Oh yeah, and I love that kind of thing. I mean, I think the thing that really drew me towards film was that because I'd always been such an art person, it was the first job I ever found where I could do all of the, like you said, all the different things that I love. Like I love production design, I love photography, I love costumes. I kind of love it all, and being a filmmaker and specifically a director kind of allowed me to play in all of those pools simultaneously, which is really cool. And I also think that going back to having some sort of experience prior to just, graduating high school and becoming a film person is that I guess I feel like filmmaking should be treated as an art form. And if you're obsessed with films as a kid and you only want to do film and you only want to be a filmmaker, I think it's very easy to fall into just replicating the filmmakers and the films you love. And I think we all start that way anyway, whether you want to or not. But I do think that having sort of a background in art has helped me sort of approach it more like from the same perspective I would sort of approach any other sort of artistic medium, even though I am always inspired by the filmmakers that I grew up with and that I love. That's not the first place I start when I create a project.
Kind of going back to the filmmakers that inspired you as a kid, I'm curious, were you always interested in genre films? You referenced Poltergeist kind of offhandedly. I'm curious, was the horror genre always something that you were attracted to?
No, I hated the horror genre when I was a kid. I avoided it like the plague. I had a really horrible experience watching Nightmare on Elm Street when I was like 5, and I stopped watching horror altogether for most of my young life. Like to the point that when we would have Halloween parties at my house, my mom would rent like the Disney movie Something Wicked This Way Comes, and I was always like nervously in the back of the room like shitting my pants because I had to watch Something Wicked This Way Comes and I didn't want my friends to know that I was a wimp.
Oh.
Okay, so you said you were late into it into college. What turned that around? Because I don't want to say you're pigeonholed in it by any means, but you've certainly got a flair for genre now. Like what finally turned you back to it?
So I would avoid it at all costs up until I was, I think, 8th grade or maybe 9th grade. I'm a little vague on the specific year, but a friend of mine had a bootleg copy of Evil Dead 2, which is like, I'll lean into this cliche. That movie, like many other people, really turned it around for me. I felt like I remember watching it in my living room, like as clear as day. And I remember for the first time ever really seeing a filmmaker kind of bleeding through every frame and seeing sort of this like over the top, audacious, just pure joy kind of coming through in every frame. And I think I was also seeing, again, not to keep leaning into the art side of things, but I think because I was always such an art-oriented kid, I saw that art kind of coming through in that movie. And I remember prior to that, I think I had a very limited idea of what horror had to be. I think I always thought horror had to be very serious and very scary. And in my mind, it was sort of like, half-nude co-eds getting butchered in the woods by somebody with a pig mask. And so when I saw Evil Dead 2, and I realized that horror could be something so much different, I guess. I don't want to undercut the pig mask butcher, but when I saw that there were other types of horror that could be embraced, I really sort of became enamored with it. And interestingly, I saw that movie and I saw Brain Dead or Dead Alive, Peter Jackson movie, about a week later. And those two movies just sent me on the path that I never recovered from. I've just been an obsessed fanatic ever since. But I'm always coming at it from, you guys know.
Yeah.
Oh,
If
yeah.
that's a cliche, then we're all happy to be part of that same cliche.
Well, those two films are just so alive, which is, I know, Dead Alive and Evil Dead is kind of a funny word to use, but just like the camera is like so energetic in both of them, and like the action direction is incredible. And like you said, it's clear that it's the filmmakers are having fun, right? And there's just this unbridled creativity going on, and so I love both of those.
Yeah.
They were inspirational to me too, as a teenager when I saw them, and just as a filmmaker as well.
Yeah, and I think I remember Evil Dead 2 was the turning point, but Brain Dead, Dead Alive is I feel like I have to say both titles. I don't know why. It's some purist in me. But that was the one that I just think that like the level of craft in that is stunning. I mean, I think he's doing a lot of the stuff that Sam Raimi was doing, but at a whole other level with just storytelling and mise en scene and production design and stuff that, like, honestly, I don't think anybody's topped it to this day.
Plus, I kick ass for the Lord is one of the best all-timer quotes. So
Agreed.
So many quotes in that movie.
Yeah.
Many quotes. I love it.
Going back to your FSU days, you said you drove back down south. You jumped right into anything you could, whether it was helping on stuff, whether it was helping on something Aaron might have been making, or basically, how did you get from that to making your own short films?
So the way that FSU has this really incredible film program, but it's so hard to get into. It's about 24 kids in a class per year. And at the time, everything was shot on film. And I think you got to write and direct 5 films, each one with like a more extensive, grip and electric package. And they had cranes and electric trucks. I mean, it was insane the amount of equipment that they were sort of just giving kids. But it also was this amazing program where, it was like 90% a production-based program. So I think by the time you graduate from the 2-year program, you've worked on like 64 films, doing every single job on set, including writing and directing. And so I just quickly aligned myself with the school because I wasn't in the program because it was such a competitive program to get into. And I started volunteering on the weekends, and I got to the point where I was just volunteering almost nonstop. And that sort of helped me, get a little bit of leverage to actually get into the program. But then once in the program, that's when I started making films for the first time. So, going back to sort of not being the child prodigy, I don't think I made my first real, honest to goodness film until I was in grad school. And so to this day, I kind of feel like, I teach some classes for young up and coming filmmakers. And I think my biggest thing is time that I wasted as a young person, kind of drinking beer with my friends and not having any direction and sort of thinking about what I could have been doing back then. And to this day, I think that's a thing that I'm constantly thinking about is like, no more wasted time. You have to sort of go all in. I don't think I answered your question at all. I'm sorry.
No, you did. I was basically asking, like, you weren't part of the program, but you did jump in and, offered a hand essentially till you got to the point where I guess the segue was, when did you actually jump in and make your own short yourself beyond the FSU experience?
Oh, like post FSU, you mean?
Yeah.
So I made a film. My thesis film in film school was a horror film called Kirksdale. And that movie, I always sort of imagined that I would go to film school, I would sort of learn the craft, and then I wanted to Sam Raimi it somewhere on the East Coast, make an independent film on my own steam and under my own terms. But I did make a thesis film that ended up doing really well for the school. It kind of became like one of the flagship films of the program, and they sent it to all these festivals all over the place, and I ended up getting an agent and a manager before I even graduated. And so everyone told me that if you have an agent and a manager, you have to go to Los Angeles. So I decided, okay, I'll go to Los Angeles for 2 years. And if this doesn't work out, or if it's just like a bunch of bullshit, then I'll come back to the East Coast and I'll start making movies again. And those 2 years ended up being 12 years. And the first several years of being in LA was surreal because I had all this, quote unquote heat or whatever they call it when I first moved out here. And so I was taking all of these meetings and meetings that I had no business taking, honestly, like places that were never going to give me a movie. But it was just like, you kind of do this water bottle tour thing. And I remember feeling like being a filmmaker was going to be pretty easy. I just had to, take these meetings and eventually a great project would come my way. And I started running into this sort of roadblock, which was, you can't direct a feature because you've never directed a feature before. Like maybe you should write something. And so I started writing. I was like, I guess I should learn how to write. And so I spent another 2 years writing, and I ended up doing a script that sort of got a bunch of attention again. And I started doing these meetings again, and everybody said, "Well, you can't direct this. I mean, you never directed a feature before." And so it was this kind of surreal moment where I think I spent 4 years just taking a million meetings and writing and not going anywhere. And I kind of had this moment where I realized, wow, I thought I was going to come out here for 2 years and check it out. I've now been here for 4 years and I haven't made one thing. And so I sort of teamed up with a couple of my classmates, and we decided to make The Root of the Problem, which was a little tiny short film that we made in my friend's garage for $4,000, I think. And that was kind of the beginning of just sort of getting a taste of what it means to make something on your own. Because another thing about FSU that was such an amazing program for giving you all of these tools and resources to make projects, but it doesn't train you how to work independently. So you kind of live in this perfect production bubble, and you have entire crews and equipment and the cameras and film processing and all the sort of bells and whistles. And then they send you out into the world and you're like, okay, I'm ready to make a studio film now. And when no studio wants to make a film with you, which is always the case, then you suddenly don't know how to sort of operate. So, and I think Aaron Moorhead would probably say the same thing. We had to kind of relearn how to be independent filmmakers again, which was kind of a weird process. But I think the takeaway is that as long as you're making something, you're moving forward. And if you're not making something, you're standing still. And so The Root of the Problem was the first film. And then I have kind of kept on making films throughout that process. And I think I'd made 3 or 4 shorts post-film school when I wrote the Mortuary Collection. And it was the first feature that I'd written where I was like, oh, I can literally take one piece of this movie out of the script and finance it myself and make it and use it as a proof of concept. But it won't just be a proof of concept. It will also be like a part of the movie. So in 2015, I did a Kickstarter and I raised some money and I made The Babysitter Murders, which is 1/5 of the Mortuary Collection.
So I was kind of curious. I knew that The Babysitter Murders was the short that had existed before the Mortuary Collection, but is also in the Mortuary Collection. I didn't realize that it was originally penned as part of a greater anthology film. So that makes a lot of sense because I was like, oh, it fits so neatly in this. How did that happen?
Yeah, it was interesting because I remember writing that short independently of the feature first, and I loved it so much. And I had so many other shorts that were sort of either rattling around in my brain or somewhere on a folder in my desktop that I was like, I'd always loved anthology films. I was like, oh, I'm gonna take my 5 favorite shorts that I've ever written and see if I can tie them all together in something larger and more interesting, because I do miss that form. I mean, this is in 2012 when anthologies weren't even a thing anymore. I think the last one had been Trick or Treat, and so they were hard to come by. And I remember I sort of picked the films and I kind of created the wraparound and I sort of tied it all together and I kind of figured out what the form was going to be. And then when it came to shooting one of them, The Babysitter Murders just happened to be the most contained with the least amount of actors. So it was like the most doable on sort of a Kickstarter budget.
Got it. So before we dive deeper into the Mortuary Collection, I'm a big fan of Halloween, my favorite movie. Mm-hmm. I'm sure it's not a coincidence. The original title of Halloween was The Babysitter Murders. Uh-huh. So did that concept, are you a slasher fan, or was it more just you had a desire to kind of comment on that subgenre of horror? Because it sounds like growing up you didn't grow up loving slasher films since Nightmare on Elm Street. You had some trauma apparently as a child.
Right. No, that's a great question. If I'm being completely honest, I remember the whole concept for The Babysitter Murders came from when I was sitting in a coffee shop one day and I was talking to a friend of mine who loved slasher movies, and I was thinking, God, do I really hate slasher movies? I just feel like they're the romantic comedy of horror. They're the most predictable, the most tropey, the most standard. And I was just thinking about all the things about them that just feel so route. And sort of the idea for The Babysitter Murders kind of came to me, and I was like, oh, okay. Oh, so this is going to be kind of a slasher movie, but it's going to be commenting on slasher movies. And at first it was really poking fun at slasher movies, and it was a lot more cartoony and sort of maybe more Sam Raimi-esque. But then, as I always do, I started studying slasher movies and watching a lot of them, especially Halloween, which I probably watched 100 times. And in the process of making the movie that was sort of poking fun at slasher movies, I kind of fell in love with the format. And the short itself kind of evolved to reflect that love, and specifically Halloween, which I just think is one of the most incredible movies ever. So it was sort of a weird roundabout journey to finding my way to slasher films after not being a fan for my whole life.
It's interesting because you can have a different take, not having the nostalgia factor of them, or the baggage of maybe youth and how they sway our opinions of a lot of movies. So you came at them later in life, so maybe you had a more objective eye to them, and that could be why you found them to be the rom-coms of the genre. Because you're not wrong. I mean, I think that's why we love when a good one hits or when one breaks the mold, because there are so many that just fit the formula. But that moves me into something I wanted to ask you about Mortuary Collection, because it sounds like you had the anthology in your brain all the way back into 2012. Because I wanted to ask, most anthologies we made our own that's made up of multiple filmmakers and different styles. And you being a shorts guy, you actually had this idea with the wraparound now for several years. So beyond just writing and directing all of them by yourself, like did any of that change from 2012 to current as far as like one short got removed or fully rewritten? Did any of them kind of maneuver in and out of the anthology as it came to fruition?
Oh yeah, it's been a wild process. I mean, at every step of the way, it's sort of evolved, and that's the thing. I think that's the period of filmmaking that I love the most. The period from when you decide you're going to make it to when you actually start shooting it, because I think that's when the components really come to life, and you really force yourself to sort of look at it like, how is this going to play out visually? How is this going to evolve? How are the characters going to interact? And I think all of the best ideas come from that period. And this movie, that period was like 7 years. So it constantly kept evolving. Like I said, at first, the Babysitter Murders was very cartoony and leaning much heavier into comedy, I think. Not to a degree that it would be considered a comedy first, but I remember there was a sequence where the slasher gets stabbed and he falls on the ground, and he sort of sits up and he's looking at this knife in his stomach. And then he looks at the slasher movie that's playing in front of him. And in the slasher movie, the slasher like pulls a knife out of his chest and like keeps walking. And he's like inspired by that. So he rips it out of his own chest and he just like howls and starts crying. And there was a lot of this, like a lot of comedy, I guess. And then as we made the movie and as the actors came in, as it started seeing it on its feet, it started taking on this kind of like a bit of a classier, like maybe something more similar to Halloween. And that process continues. So then as I went into making the feature, I already had this short. So this short was kind of steering the ship tonally and aesthetically, which of course, we kind of made this sort of contained short with this kind of hyper stylized look. And we're like, well, we have to continue this now, but now we have to build a town, and now we have to sort of do all these other shorts, and each short has to have like an interesting, timeless aesthetic to it. And so, of course, as you know, and anybody who makes movies, that when you start to make movies that are quote unquote period pieces, everything becomes incredibly complicated, from hair and makeup to costumes to locations to basically everything. But we rolled with it because we were sort of, every time we would shoot a piece, we were sort of fascinated by how it would turn out. And we were like, well, we've set the bar, let's just keep moving. So it kind of really forced us to go above and beyond. But as far as the shorts go, originally there was, I think the 4 shorts in the story stayed uniform up until we were shooting. And about halfway through shooting, because we couldn't afford to shoot this as one solid production, we kind of shot it piece by piece over the course of 2 years. And about 50% of the way through, my producers came to me and they said, hey, this one short is, we just don't have enough money to shoot this last short. As a matter of fact, if we do shoot it, not only, we didn't have enough money to afford it, but also if we did have the money, the movie was going to be about 2.5 hours long, because each of the shorts was about a 20-page script. And just through the process of making them, they all expanded, and the movie was already running on 2 hours. And so they said, you have to cut the first short in the movie, and you have to replace it with something that's about 5 minutes long and something that we can do for almost no money. And that's kind of how the first short in the Mortuary Collection was born, Medicine Cabinet, is that I sort of walked away and I was like, okay, I need a 1-location movie with 1 actor. What can I do sort of in 2 days? And I started thinking about how we didn't have a monster movie, and monster movies that's my favorite subgenre in horror. And I really wanted to have a monster sequence. And so I was like, okay, I did a monster sequence, and it's 1 character in 1 room with a monster, and maybe it's a silent film. And sort of that's where the Medicine Cabinet came from. And interestingly, I remember I wrote the script and I sent it to my producers. And again, this is like midway through production. So we're like editing one thing and we're preparing to shoot something else as I'm writing it. And I sent it to them, and they were like, oh, we love it. It's great. Perfect. Let's do it. And I was like, but here's the thing. It's not a story. It's not a real story. It's like a little, just an exercise in sort of monster tentacle madness. Like there's no character development. There's no twist. There's nothing substantial that makes it match any of the other stories in our movie. And they were like, doesn't matter. This is it. We got to do it. Let's go. We're making a thing. So we just rolled into it. But as I thought about that, I was like, well, this is interesting because I can have Sam talk about this directly in the movie. And this could be sort of a warm-up story. So Montgomery, he's challenged to tell a story, and he kind of throws a softball, and Sam's not impressed. And in a way, I guess Sam is sort of saying what I imagine me as an audience member would say if I watched the movie, which is like, yeah, that was fun, but not a real story. Like, you got to do better. And it's kind of, as I look back on it now, I'm really happy we kind of stumbled down that rabbit hole, because I like this idea of an anthology that sort of it's sort of constantly sort of pushing itself to one up itself organically through the characters telling stories.
Yeah, that is super clever. And it's definitely the experience I had while watching it, whereas I felt like the stories were getting better or more deeper, more complex as the film went on. And, Montgomery was kind of upping his storytelling game. I wanted to go back to something you said, because it's funny, because in my notes, I had a comment to ask you about the timeless feel of the wraparound, especially. Certain segments definitely are more dated in a particular moment in history, but the wraparound in particular almost feels anachronistic. Like, I was like, wait, is this modern, or is this, a period? I kind of kept asking myself those questions. And so I kind of wanted to ask you, like, what the intention was there, and kind of making it almost feel like it could take place in any time period.
I think that is the intention. The intention is to make the whole thing timeless. And I think there's definitely an aesthetic quality that is appealing to, the 40s and the 50s, this sort of the time period before synthetic materials were really common, and plastics and everything kind of started to become very period specific. And I think also going back to never wanting to watch horror as a kid, I wouldn't watch traditional horror, but I would watch the original Twilight Zone. My dad had almost every episode on VHS. And so that was kind of my into horror before I could really handle the hard stuff. And I think because of that, this kind of classic aesthetic has just always been a part of everything I do. And kind of rolling into this, I was thinking about, well, I want these stories to be sort of timeless in the way that campfire stories are timeless. I don't want them to be set in any one specific period. I don't really want cell phones or technology. I just want the stories to kind of live as stories. And sort of thinking about all of these sort of stories being filtered through Montgomery Dark's lens, and he's clearly a classic person, to say the least, kind of what gave us a good justification for making all of these kind of set in the anytime, that sort of that timeless vibe. But yeah, I mean, it's funny. Part of it's the timelessness of stories, but part of it is just loving a classic Gothic aesthetic and trying to find the best way to merge the two. And I remember as we were shooting it, we sort of were aware that it was going to turn some people off, that they didn't know, because I know people are always trying to figure out when a movie's set and how it's set, and that kind of thing can bug some people. But we had a ton of fun doing it, even though it was incredibly difficult to pull off on a tiny budget.
Yeah, I personally loved that aesthetic, and I also loved how it helped create a cohesive feel across all the stories, even though they're very different subgenres of horror. And I think, having a single writer and director at the helm of all of it certainly helps with that cohesive feel. But, I was also reading that you had the same production designer and cinematographer for each segment as well. And was that also intentional to maintain consistency and a consistent look and feel? Or did you just really like working with those people and they were kind of your collaborators, so it was more of a practical decision?
Well, I think the intention from the start had always been to shoot it as more of like a traditional feature. When we first rolled into it, we were like, we're going to shoot this for, 25 days the way you normally would. And when we first found our financing, we were independently financed through one financier. And we met with 3 line producers, and each one of them said, you can't shoot this movie for any less than 4 times what your budget is. And so people wouldn't even take the job. And we were kind of sitting on this like little chunk of money with this like massive unwieldy script and thinking like, how are we going to pull this off? We can't even get a line producer to agree to like work with us. And so what we were sort of having this crisis moment, and I I heard all these horror stories about independent filmmakers losing money because they couldn't make a decision or they couldn't figure it out. And so I said, look, we know how to make shorts. We've done this a million times before. Let's just start making this movie while we still have the money, and it'll work itself out. And that's kind of how we went into production, which is not a way that I would suggest people go into production, but I think it's sort of was a necessity for us. And so we tried to maintain the same team throughout. And of course, when you're working with incredibly talented people like we were, these people get other jobs and sort of there was a lot of kind of finagling with our schedule to try to maintain this same team throughout the course of this 2-year kind of sporadic production. And we surprisingly did a pretty good job keeping with the same team. We did end up having to get a second cinematographer for all the stuff that we shot up in Oregon with with Montgomery and Sam, all that stuff in the mortuary. We had a secondary DP come in because our first DP was like shooting massive TV shows and he just like couldn't fit in his schedule. But otherwise, yeah, we had the same production designer throughout and same makeup artist, same special effects team, and a few different crews. But we got really lucky.
Yeah, I think there's something, I don't know if it's a sense of satisfaction, but with indie filmmakers being told they can't do something, they're sometimes on the other end of it, you're like, yes, I can, because look what I did for 20 grand. That most people would say, no, that'll cost you $500,000. You mentioned earlier, just in passing, that the root of the problem was $4 grand. And brother, that every bit of that was on screen. Like that amazed me when you said that number, like $4 grand. So you certainly know how to make it independent style and you know how to put the money on the screen. So like, yeah, I have no doubt that you were able to approach it as, let's shoot this short. Let's shoot this short. Let's shoot this short. As daunting as that can be, you know that the short itself could be, 20 grand here, 50 grand there, or whatever. So somehow I wouldn't recommend that to everybody, but it seems like you were the right guy to make that process work.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, it's the good, fast, cheap triangle always.
Right.
If you want to do it cheap and you want to do it good, it just takes time. And that's something that I think I've always leaned super heavily on with my shorts. Like the root of the problem in particular, I remember I couldn't find a location that looked cool and old timey that we could shoot in for cheap. And so I was like, well, my friend has a warehouse. Let me just go on Craigslist every day and look for sets that are being thrown away. And so it took me about 2 months and I drove all over LA and collected different set walls from different productions that were sort of in the trash, and then sort of assembled it together. And all of the furniture in that movie I found on the side of the road. I just painted to match. I think I found a dentist chair on Craigslist for next to nothing. And everything in that was sort of built in my bedroom over the course of several months. And so I kind of love doing that stuff. So it almost become like a thing, like, oh, I can do all this myself. And I kind of thought that rolling into the feature. But what I didn't anticipate is, when you do a short, you kind of kill yourself for 6 months and then you sort of get a time to recoup. And I never anticipated what it would be like to try to make 5 short films all at once, back to back to back to back. So it was pretty demoralizing at some point. I would say that sort of continuously going, never being done shooting because you're always going to go into production again. And I remember we went from having like a pretty decent 40-person crew on some days to like me and my producer, Justin Ross, in the woods with my camera and a fog machine shooting shots, like just the two of us. And it was that kind of process for 2 years straight, which definitely took its toll, I think, on us emotionally, spiritually, physically, our relationships. But I guess that's the kind of thing you do. The nice thing is that once you start, you have to take it over the finish line. And so that's sort of the thing that's driving you. But it was definitely a surreal process.
Yeah, you definitely had an unconventional method of approaching it. When people were saying no, people were saying you'll never be able to shoot it for that much. So, and there's no one way to make a movie, right? Everyone always looks for advice, but I think there's a lot of different paths. And earlier when we were talking, and you'd mentioned that the babysitter murders kind of served almost as a proof of concept. Did you find that having that was helpful at all for any bits of funding or maybe casting or just, getting some of your collaborators together? Is that something you'd recommend people do, for any features, shooting a POC, or ultimately did it move the needle at all for you?
It didn't. I'm really torn. I think that's a great question, and a question that I've asked myself many times since, because I definitely sort of came up as a filmmaker in a time where the motto was that if you made a great short, you could get people's attention and you could sort of, they would give you an opportunity to step up. But I think that clear path to being a filmmaker has disappeared now. I don't think that's, I'm not saying you can't do it, but I don't think that that's like a well-trodden way to find your way to feature filmmaking anymore. So with the short, I remember we made it and we had a ton of attention. And again, the water bottle tour, which at that point, it was my third time doing it. And I was like very non-excited. I mean, I was excited. It was like, okay, I know what this is now. This is where I talk to people. I get to meet awesome people. They talk about how great my film is, and they don't ever work with me. And there was a period there for about a year where no matter how much people loved the movie, the short, nobody wanted to make the feature. And I went to one general meeting on the water bottle tour at this kind of huge company. And the executive there, this girl, Allison Friedman, said, look, I love this short and I love the script for the feature. My boss would never, ever make this movie. But if you're open to it, I'd like to try to raise some money on the side and see if I can finance this independently. And I said, yes, sure, great, sounds good. Not expecting anything of it. And I didn't hear anything from her for about 6 months. And then all of a sudden, out of the blue, she called me and she was like, hey, it's Allison. Do you remember me? And I was like, yeah, kind of. And she was like, so I found the money. Do you want to make this movie? And of course I said yes. And then she ended up being our producer. She quit her job. And sort of me, Allison, and then my producing partner, Justin, were the three people who were meeting with line producers and getting rejected. And so I guess it did help me find financing for the movie. But I wouldn't say that I think that's a pretty crazy anomaly to have a development executive just decide they want to try to finance it on the side. So from that regard, I would not say the short, even though the short did help us find the financing to make the feature, I wouldn't say that that's something that's replicable. But I will say this, and this was the hugest thing about having a short that was sort of polished and ready to go, is every creative collaborator who we wanted to work with, especially the ones that were out of our league, who would not do a movie this small, when we could send them this short and they could see the movie we were making before they committed, was massive. And that's how we got so many of our actors. That's how we got Studio ADI, the special effects company that did all of our practical effects. And that's how we got even down to our poster designer. Like, it ended up being this incredible tool once we had the money to sort of inspire other creatives, especially people who get approached all the time and they sort of, the default response is, I'm too busy or I can't do it. The short helped us kind of break through to them. And so if my answer, like leading up to making the film, would have been, don't make a short, but my answer after was, well, it was a huge asset. And so you kind of got to decide for yourself. But I definitely think going into making a short and thinking that short is going to just magically get you the keys to the kingdom would be sort of not the best way to go about it.
Right. Seems like, yeah, it served one purpose, if not helping in the other. But I think visual aids in any kind of, obviously, a good lookbook or a good graphic novel attached to a script that's an adaptation of it or something like that will always go a long way for certain people, at least, to get a visual. But I do want to ask you on that same note about how you were getting it off the ground. Clancy Brown, who I think is genre character actor, Mount Rushmore. I think everybody in our age range loves this man. You've even done a handful of press for this movie with him. So he feels like he was kind of meant for the role of Montgomery Dark, the Mortician. So was he one of the folks you originally envisioned for the role? And how did casting him come about?
I know, right? I can't imagine anybody else being Montgomery Dark at this point. He just was the role. So I didn't write it with him in mind specifically because I just don't really write with actors in mind. I remember when I was writing Montgomery, he was kind of an amalgamation of the tall man and the preacher from Poltergeist 2. Just kind of this skeletal, tall, kind of insect-like man, sort of just living in this mortuary. He was kind of designed to be an archetype, and that's kind of how we approached every aspect of this movie. Like, what's the archetype that we love? Not the archetype we want to make fun of, but the archetype that we genuinely love, or I genuinely love. And let's start there, and let's see if we can sort of twist it into something else. And so when it came to casting, I immediately was just going out after character actors. And Clancy was at the very top of my list. And when he read the script, he loved it. I thought the short had got us to him faster, but apparently he didn't see the short till after he read the script, which was surprising to me. But he really loved the script. And I met with him. And this kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier, but it was really interesting. I found this out recently when we were doing another sort of press thing, and he sort of told this to me. But I remember when I went to meet him for the first time, they did this whole thing where they say, like, oh, you have to go meet Clancy at this diner, and if he likes you, he might do the movie, and if not, he won't. And it's this like very stressful thing where you're like, oh, I'm going to meet one of my favorite actors of all time, and my personality and how I sort of come off is going to be the make or break of the whole film. And I sat down, I talked to him, and we got along right away because he's a big genre guy. And he's like the most easygoing, non-actory person you can imagine. And so I'm sort of telling him the story about this movie, and I'm sort of kind of like talking about how the script has sort of been going around Hollywood for like years and nobody wanted to make it. And so I made the short, and then people still didn't want to make it. And as I'm saying all this stuff with my mouth, my brain is basically saying like, stop telling him that nobody wants to make it. Like, you're fucking this whole thing up. Like, just stick to the script. You're rambling. And so he ended up saying yes. And then recently he told me that the reason that he decided to do the movie was because I told him how nobody would do it. And he was like, if nobody wants to make this movie, and this kid is just going to keep pushing that boulder up the hill despite it for all these years, this must be something worthy of doing. And that's why he said yes. And it's interesting because now I've come to learn that he's an artist in the truest sense. And he was drawn to this idea of people just sort of going at it despite all odds. And that's just really cool. I can only hope to work with more people like that in the future. I mean, I would choose to only work with people like that if I could.
I love that story. I mean, just being authentic, as cliche as it sounds,
Mm-hmm.
I think it does, help put you on a path where you actually work with the type of people you want to work with. And, had he been the type of actor where that would have been a problem, and, you would have cast him anyway because you didn't reveal that, like maybe they would have been a pain in the butt to work with when things weren't perfect on set, because they're not necessarily drawn to films for the same kind of spirit that you are. So I think ultimately, I think being yourself and showing your passion and being truthful, kind of can help prevent problems down the road and help ensure you find the right people to collaborate with.
100%. No, you're so right. And that was, I remember when he showed up on set or the day before he showed up on set, I remember I was thinking about his filmography and the directors that he'd worked with in the past and imagining what size the crews must have been for some of these amazing films he's been a part of. And I'm looking at our like tiny like ragtag crew up in Portland, Oregon, or up in Astoria actually at that point. And we had no trailers. We had like bare minimum catering. Like the whole thing was so ragtag. And I was like, oh man, he's either going to like love the shit out of this or he's going to hate it instantly. And of course he was just the absolute best and sort of the emotional, spiritual linchpin of the whole project. And he would like all the like lesser experienced actors, he would sort of help them through it and sort of give them confidence. Like local people in town would stop by set. He'd give them set tours and sort of, he was just such a gregarious, amazing person to work with. And it's almost surreal that he is an actor because he feels like, I've joked before, he feels like he should be like living in Wyoming, building furniture in like a really cool old barn, but somehow he's a performer and, yeah, he's really the best. I love that I don't have to lie about that. I love that he's just such a cool dude.
That's I think the perfect story to end our mortuary collection conversation on. And I want to transition now to 50 States of Fright, which is the horror anthology series for Quibi, and of course with Sam Raimi, who we've talked about a bit as the executive producer. First of all, like how the heck did you get involved with a Quibi series?
So I had a meeting with Ghost House, not with Sam, but with Sam's executive Rommel. And I had sent him an early cut of the Mortuary Collection, actually, like way, way early in one of the rough stages. And he passed it along to Sam. I don't even know if he was supposed to do that, but he did, which like I was shitting bricks because I was like, oh God, Sam Raimi saw like a working cut of this movie I'm working on. But Sam really flipped out for the movie. He was like really fascinated with the shot in The Babysitter Murders where where she drops the TV on the guy's head. I guess he watched it like several times again and again and again, trying to figure out how he did it. And so he was such a huge fan. So he sort of put me up for the series when they were sort of reaching out to writer and directors. And I remember when my manager called me about that, he was like, Sam Raimi, this is so dumb. He was like, Sam Raimi's making a web series. Do you want to do one? And I was like, yeah, of course. I love Sam Raimi. But in my head, I was imagining it was going to be some little like, oh, they give us like $10,000 and we go make a short and we send it off. Like it seemed like a very small like side project or something. And it wasn't until I got hired and I flew up to Vancouver to make the segment that I realized that I was in just like this whole different league. Like when a black car picked me up at my house, I was like, what the fuck is happening here? And so it was really an incredible experience. And Sam basically, that he set up this show with Quibi, and he basically said, like, I want to do this show how I want to do it. I want to bring in the directors I wanted to bring in. I want them to have full creative freedom. Like, he was just really such a huge advocate for the creators. So we all wrote our own scripts, and we flew to Vancouver, and it was basically like making our own short film with Sam Raimi. And it was, I wouldn't say sky's the limit, but like based on what I'm used to, it was incredible. Like the crew was 160 people or something, and they were just all there to make my weird little short film that I wrote on a whim because I thought I was making a web series with Sam Raimi. And it was great. And Sam like talked to all the producers, and he was like, look, let them do everything they can within means to let them sort of let it be their voice. And he kind of gave us all the rope in the world to hang ourselves with. And it was really fun to watch and meet all the other filmmakers and see the projects come to life. And there was only one season, I guess 2 seasons technically, but I think it was on track to be a really special show. And I'm sort of sad that Quibi kind of stopped being a thing, because I really believe that series was on its way to being like one of the most interesting and unique anthology series that we have.
So my understanding of it is that each episode is based on kind of a different state, in the U.S. And so you directed Scared Stiff, the Oregon segment. And it's funny because we talked about the Mortuary Collection being shot, at least part of it, in Astoria. So when I had read all of that, I was like, is he from Oregon? And then I looked at it, and we've talked, you're from Florida. So I'm from the Pacific Northwest, originally from Washington. So I'm curious, like, did something draw you back to Oregon for that short after your experience with the Mortuary Collection, or is it just a coincidence?
No, definitely. Well, 2 things. I'm really from Maine. I went to school in Florida, but okay. I'm born and raised in Maine, the Pacific Northwest of the East Coast.
Yep.
So so that aesthetic, that was the big aesthetic that I was sort of pushing for with the Mortuary Collection. And when we realized that it was going to be really tricky to shoot on the East Coast, Oregon was the first place I thought of, because it just has such epic landscape, and it's sort of just, I'd actually never been until I location scouted, but then I fell in love with it, especially being there in Astoria for those 3 months I was. So when they came to me with 50 states, they were like, oh, you should do Maine. It's where you're from. But I couldn't think of a great urban legend from Maine. And it was one of those things where they like say, hey, will you pitch an idea? Great. Pitch it in like 4 days. So I had to come up with something really fast, and I was still kind of like not in Oregon anymore, but still sort of there partially. And so that was the first place I thought of. And then I sort of came around to the Sasquatch story, which is interesting because do you know which state in the United States has the 3rd most sightings of the Sasquatch after Washington and Oregon?
Is it going to be a tricky thing like Florida or something?
It is Florida.
Yeah.
It is Florida.
Yeah, I think I read that somewhere.
That's counting the skunk ape. I mean, that's their local legend, right?
Yep. That's right. You're right. I think if you're taking into account skunk ape, that probably accounts for about 50% of the Sasquatch sightings. So.
All right. Well, we have learned a lot, and that's the best tidbit yet, I think. That Becky's home stomping grounds, and then her partner Brad and my own we're from Florida ourselves. Our stomping grounds as well being Bigfoot country.
That's how you were so quick to go to the skunk ape.
Right. No, we appreciate the answers and the honesty about the process and all of it. So we're excited to see what you do next. We'll talk about that here shortly. If you're good, we'll jump into the little rapid fire bit we do. You said you're game for it, and you strike me as someone who won't be too in their own head about it if we go through a little questionnaire based on some stuff we learned about you so far. And again, don't think too hard on it. First thing that comes to mind, we're not going to make it truly rapid. We're not going to put suspenseful music underneath you. But it's not a cool test. We're just kind of let the listeners get a little bit more about you and know some of your taste. So Becky can start us off.
Yeah, and feel free to pass on any questions if you're like, I don't know. We can come back to it later. All right, the first one. What movie do you think you've seen the most in your life?
Oh, I would say Dead Alive, Brain Dead.
Nice.
He can't not do the both. I love that. It's like an automated response. He's got to say
I
both titles.
can't
Because somebody
every time I
overseas
talk
is
to
hearing this
anyone-
going, it's
Yes.
what movie is he
Every
talking
time
about?
I talk to somebody about it, they're like they cringe about it. And then
Yeah.
I went to New Zealand and I saw the locations and I had an emotional moment and I'm like, okay, I'll never disrespect this movie again.
No, we respect that. So, if it's not the same movie, what is your comfort movie? Like your anytime, anywhere, warm blanket movie?
It's similar, but it's The Frighteners, actually.
Ah, another Jackson joint. What is your favorite horror movie franchise?
Does a franchise mean it has to be more than three or three or more? Is that what are the definitions?
Let's cap
three.
it there.
3 or more.
I'm gonna go Elm Street. Interestingly enough,
Because it stuck with you, even though you may not have wanted it to for years.
it did, and it's
Scarred you.
and as far as like somebody asked me this question just casually recently, and it's surprising how I'm just not really a franchise guy, but I do think that like as far as like the massive franchises goes, like the Pandora's box aspect of what Nightmare on Elm Street is, which I know it's a slasher movie kind of, but it's sort of not, and I'm drawn to that. I like that it sort of can get as weird as it possibly wants, and it sort of all fits within the world.
No, I do agree with that. It's mine as well, and for partly that reason, like there's range to it where if Friday the 13th went too far off of the track, it would reject, a lot of the audience.
Yeah.
Where Nightmare's definitely gone weird.
Now, Sean, if you had to come up with a pitch for a new Nightmare on Elm Street, what would that be?
First of all, how dare you put me on the spot? This is my show. No, I'm kidding. Strangely enough, the way he went meta with New Nightmare, I feel like there's a modern spin to that where you go meta on the meta.
Oh, shit.
Double meta it.
That just hurt my brain just a little bit.
That's just in a pitch. If you give me a minute, I'll think of something better possible.
I've always wanted a better Freddy origin story of, before he was burned alive, personally. Like, that's what I would be really interested in.
You didn't like that the remake made you sympathize with the pedophile?
I was just going to talk about the remake, which I have blacked out of my memory. But I actually think there's interesting angles you could go with it too, where you are questioning whether or not he was actually guilty or not.
Right.
Whether like his family.
That's literally exactly what the executives said when they rebooted the franchise. That exact thing. They were like, can we see more about his history? And like, can he be a little bit more sympathetic?
But to me, it's not about making him sympathetic. It's about casting judgment on the town that murdered him. Like, to me, it's more interesting from that perspective, and it makes more sense if you follow the series about why they're so protective over the past about it, and like won't even talk about it, is because they also feel guilty and like question, did they actually kill the right guy? If I were to do it, I wouldn't make him sympathetic. I would make him unquestionably evil. But I would still raise other questions about like the moral quandary of the rest of the town that kind of essentially lynched him without knowing for sure if he was actually guilty. So
that is interesting. What if they revealed that he was not guilty? Is there something there to him being like an actual innocent, and it's the sort of the anger of revenge that's driving him?
I mean, the revenge angle makes a little more sense about why he's actually attacking the kids of the people that murdered him. If he did it, it's like less, I don't know, but he is just a demon. So essentially a dream demon. I don't know.
That was one of the lost subtitles, the Dream Demon. That's the only thing they didn't get to. Ryan, you did say your favorite subgenre was monster movie. So next question would be, what is your favorite Universal monster or your favorite Universal monster movie?
I thought you were going to ask my favorite monster movie. I had such a good answer.
I was going to say, if it's not, no, give us that too, please.
My favorite monster movie is The Fly, for sure. My favorite Universal would be Creature of the Black Lagoon, of course.
Yeah, I don't think there's a wrong answer for that, but I agree with you. No. It's one of mine.
Love it. What is your favorite Alfred Hitchcock film? Another one where you can't really go wrong with an answer.
Will you judge me if I say Rope?
No, that's mine
Absolutely
as well. We've had that answer 2 other times, I believe.
Oh, great. I love that movie so much. I love Rope.
And then how about your favorite Steven Spielberg film?
Ooh, that he directed?
Yeah, let's limit to that, because otherwise you're going to tell me An American Tail 5 Goes West or something.
Well, no, I was thinking Poltergeist, but
Let's not go down that rabbit hole. Don't even, Becky.
I mean, it's absolutely Jaws. I wish I had a weirder answer for you that was not Jaws, but I just love Jaws. Jaws would be one of the 3 movies that I watch before I go to direct anything. I think it's a masterpiece.
Yeah,
as everybody does. That's nothing new.
You're not alone. You're not alone.
I think a weird answer for Spielberg would be like you say, The Lost World. Like that wouldn't make any sense. But like, there's not a lot of weird answers. There's just
Kingdom of the Crystal Skull.
Yeah.
All right. Who is the one working actor out there that you've not had a chance to work with, but is at the top of your list that you really want to collaborate with?
Oh, that's such a good one. I'm going to say Michael Shannon.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, he's definitely on my list.
Yeah.
And in a similar vein, what's your dream project to direct? Be that an adaptation of an existing IP or an original concept?
Just a wide open, what's my dream project?
Yeah, it could be something you have stewing in your brain, or it could be like a remake of something.
I'd like to do a remake of Burnt Offerings.
Oh, yeah, I love Burnt Offerings. I could see how that would work really well, too, with your period aesthetic or like the timeless aesthetic as well. So I'd like to see that.
Yeah. I like the I think that it's like there's a fantasy element to that movie that's really wonderful that isn't explored fully because it kind of has a bit of a made for TV vibe to the original, even though I love the original. I'm not casting shade, but there's a bit of a formal nature to that I think could be expanded and sort of played with in a fun way.
Oh, definitely. All right. So what is your favorite Stephen King novel or short story? We had to ask. You're from Maine, I guess.
Yes. Oh, novel or short story? Well, can I give 2 answers?
Sure.
I
Why
would
not?
say it's the pandemic. There's no rules. It is my favorite novel. Short story. It's 1408. 1408 is the only thing I've ever read that made me feel nauseous while reading it because I was so scared. But yeah, I love that short.
So a follow-up question that was already ready to go for you is, because it's always a different answer, what is your favorite Stephen King film adaptation?
Ooh.
Even that's possibly two-pronged. I don't know if I'm meaning best adaptation or best movie that happens to be based on a Stephen King book, because The Shining throws that into a different answer, if that happens to be one of them.
Oh. So wait. The question is, what's the answer?
Sorry, terrible question by me. Just I was just saying, what's your favorite King film adaptation? But then in my brain going, well, that could be in best adaptation or best movie that happens to be a Stephen King story. So you pick whichever one might come to mind for you of a favorite film version of King.
How do you not say Shining? That's like a trick question.
Shining's acceptable. I think if you were to say like Shawshank or Stand By Me, those are also fine Stephen King based films.
That was, yes, Shawshank was my answer until you said The Shining. I was like, oh yeah, The Shining. The Shining is almost elevated beyond filmmaker and author. It's something else. I feel like you should make a rule that people can't say that. It's too boring.
I'm gonna just scratch the question. It was only because of your main connection.
All right, we'll move on. All right, what is your favorite episode of The Twilight Zone?
Oh my God. I know this one. It's A World His Own. Do you guys remember that one? It's a story about a writer who realizes that if he writes, he has a certain like sort of a recording machine where he like speaks into this thing and it records it on tape, and whatever he sort of says materializes in the real world. Do you guys know that one?
I do know that one, yeah.
Yep. Oh, so
that
good.
was a Matheson story, if I'm not mistaken, also.
Yes. I'm
Richard
obsessed with Matheson. And
Me too.
apparently that original story is much darker. It's interesting. I have on my desktop right now a copy of Twilight Zone magazine from 1983, in which Richard Matheson's original story was published, and apparently it's much darker and much crazier. But they couldn't sort of produce it because it was too dark for TV. So they made it sort of a broad give it like a comedic element. But I'm really excited to read it.
Yeah, there's some really great compilations of Matheson's, a lot of his shorts, and a lot of those are what, ended up being a lot of the Twilight Zone episodes, which I can't remember the names of them, but anything by Matheson is worth reading. So
it is.
Probably my favorite author.
I have all those books right here on my shelf that you're talking about.
Yep.
really incredible about those books is you'll read a story and it's like a couple on their honeymoon or driving across the country through a desert and they stop at a creepy gas station. And you're like, what a cliche setup. And then you look at the date and it's like 1943. And you're like, oh, no, he actually created the cliches. Okay, respect.
Yeah, he was like patient zero for a lot of tropes. Some of the great sci-fi writers from that era.
Yeah.
I'm with you. They don't get enough credit. Him and like Bradbury and the like. And
Oh,
Serling too.
God. Ray Bradbury. Yeah, Matheson, Serling, and Bradbury that's the trifecta for me. Like those are the people that I have every one of Ray Bradbury's short stories and Richard Matheson's short stories, and I read them often. I'm a bit obsessed.
Yeah, you mentioned Something Wicked This Way Comes, the film adaptation.
I know.
Yeah, so coming full circle.
Which I don't know. Is that a good movie that people like? Because I was always so scared.
I can't tell if it's good because I have the nostalgia goggles for it because I saw it when I was young, so I'm not sure. I mean, Jonathan Pryce is like memorable in it, but
yeah,
that's all I can really recall. It's been years.
I was just reading the book about oh man, why am I drawing a blank? It's late. The guy who wrote and directed Phantasm.
Oh, Don Coscarelli?
Don Coscarelli, yes, sorry. I don't know what is wrong with me right now. I was reading his book, and he was saying how he initially wanted to adapt Something Wicked This Way Comes, and they were like, when he was just like a kid, and he was like calling Ray Bradbury and trying to like kind of assaulting Ray Bradbury to try to get the rights. And then they finally got through to his agent, and his agent was like, oh, sorry, kids, we just sold it to Disney last week. And so he like kind of took all the things he loved about it and turned around and made Phantasm. And I'm just like, oh, I'd love to see that Coscarelli at like 21 directing Something Wicked This Way Comes.
Yeah, but I mean, it's one of those weird stories like the Jodorowsky's New Not Getting Made gave us Alien, so it's like he got Phantasm and a whole franchise out of that, you know. So you never can tell what'll come out of it if you don't get it. George Lucas got Star Wars because he couldn't get Flash Gordon, you know. Like there's countless stories like that. So
I love that. That's an awesome silver lining way to look at it.
Yeah. What do you have like a favorite or a best concert experience?
So I have a memorable concert experience. I ended up going to Woodstock 99, and it was one of the most scary / awesome experiences of my life. I was super young, and do you guys know anything about Woodstock 99?
I've read about it.
From a Conan O'Brien remote?
Well, it was the first, they tried to recreate this like awesome like atmosphere of Woodstock. And by they tried to recreate it, I mean a bunch of brands came in and just tried to like drill you with like advertising and overcharge you for like food and water. And it was this like super surreal experience where they wouldn't let you bring any food or water into the event. And it was like a 5-day event or something. And so they would like check your bags and throw away your water or your food going in. And they're like, don't worry, there'll be plenty of food and free water once you're in. But like the only free water was this cracked, broken fountain surrounded by outhouses that people were like fighting to get water. And to actually buy water was, I think, $5 a bottle, which at the time was like $12 per bottle, like with inflation. And people just went 5 days just like doing drugs and not eating and not drinking water. And like living in the dirt, and they just like rebelled, and it became this like giant Mad Max like chaos where like Red Hot Chili Peppers was playing while people were like burning things down, and it was definitely a memory for my 19-year-old self.
Right. Not fun at the time, but of course a good story for the rest of your days. Yeah, I always remember like the 25th anniversary, 94 was the mud show. Everybody was just in mud. Yeah. And then 99 is always remembered by everybody for nobody had water. That's the only thing I really knew about it either, what you just said.
Yeah, well, the 94 one kind of gave people hope that it was going to be a really cool thing, because I feel like my cousin went to 94 one. He was like, oh, we were like rolling, sliding in the mud, and everybody's having a good time, and it was peace and love. It was just like Woodstock. And so I think 99 went with that expectation, and it was just a very dark thing. But I kind of had fun. I think when you're 19, everything's fun. It doesn't matter.
It was like 1999's version of the Fire Festival, right?
Kind of. It was like that, but they let people like get way more drunk and on drugs before they revealed the secrets.
There we go. Needed a documentary filmmakers and mobile phones with cameras back then.
Oh God, it would be there would be 17 documentaries if people had cell phones.
Of course. All right, transitioning to the next question. What is your favorite spot to eat in Silver Lake? At least when, we were all going to restaurants and things like that.
Ooh, that's a good one.
A lot of jerks are still going to restaurants there.
So I love this place. It's not quite Silver Lake proper, but it's this place called Spoke, which is like sort of just Silver Lake adjacent. It's like a bike cafe right along the LA River. The LA River is not known for being beautiful, but in this certain area, it's like in this kind of warehouse district, and you go through these like shipping crates open up, and it's this like giant open area, and they have like bike shops there and all these outdoor seatings, and they serve really amazing food and beer, and people just sit on picnic tables, and it's like it really is off the beaten path, and it's full of the kind of people you want to be day drinking around as opposed to some other places in LA.
I've been there, and I agree, and you would not find it if you didn't know where to look. Because
it's like hidden.
Yeah, that's a good answer. And then getting almost down to the end here, what would be Ryan Spindell's walk-up music? Like, what's your entrance if you're coming in for your TED Talk or if you're a fighter or a ball player?
Man. I'd probably go with, you got to go with something a little bit buzzy that like people kind of know because you want people to feel the vibe when you walk in. I'd probably go with like a Modest Mouse song, maybe Float On, something more in the mainstream.
Nice.
Yeah, that fits. You seem like a pretty laid back guy.
You can just float on
I love
stage.
these questions.
All right, last one. What is the one thing you haven't been able to do since quarantining and social distancing that you're just dying to do? Like the first thing you're going to do when, the pandemic is behind us and the restrictions are lifted.
Oh my God, go to the movies. I'm dying.
Yes.
I'm dying. I'm 100% a 3 times to the theater a week person. This has been the worst.
Yeah, I was abusing my Draft House card when it was open for those 8 months or so before the pandemic shut it back down.
I know. I had it.
And that was after a 4-year delay of it being here.
I know.
So yeah, it was taken away from me, and I'm still bitter about it every single day.
The Draft House was like a big tease for years in LA. They were just like, we're coming any minute. We're coming forever. And they came and same thing. I got the Draft House card, applied, I got in. I was like, cool, I'm in. I saw like 3 movies and then like the pandemic happened.
Yeah, it's been the common answer lately. It's just people who are, at least on our side of the world, not being able to go to the movies. It's certainly mine. I'm dreading it every day that I can't do so.
Yeah. I don't even, there's not even a hesitation there. I think about it every day.
Yep.
Same. But that's the end of the rapid fire aspect of it. We appreciate those answers. There's some good ones in there.
Don't lie to me. I know there's not good answers in there. They're all generic.
Yeah,
No, I told you it's not a cool test. There's no pass or fail. No wrong answers.
I was going to say, I think it was one of the more rapid ones we've done. Oftentimes, like, you were pretty quick. Usually people feel much more tortured, I think, by it.
Well, but then I took us down like some weird like side paths that sort of ruined the whole rapid fire thing. But now I understand why you do the precursor where you're like, it's not a cool test because there is, I wanted to just give you weird answers that like just throw you guys into chaos. And
No, I think that's the problem is everybody gets too in their own head about it. I mean, we would too if we were put on the spot. So we understand. Thank you for enduring the torture. But before we let you go, is there something you have coming up next that you can talk about? Anything on the horizon for you?
Well, I wrote 2 episodes of 50 States of Fright Season 3, which you will not see. Thanks a lot, Katzenberg. Just kidding.
Well, there's roads to go down with that, but I don't disagree when they said, hey, the pandemic hit and then people weren't remote or they weren't mobile, I should say, as much as they would have been, walking onto subways or commuting as much and having the ability to watch stuff on their phone. So like there might be something to that. We'll never know. We can second guess some of the decisions they made with Quibi.
It's true.
Jump to end, but true. There's a ton of creative people we know that lost some jobs, so there's nothing to be proud of for it failing. So
no, I agree 100%. Even had I not been working with them directly, I think the amount of incredible, interesting people who were getting their first stab at doing really cool things was really awesome. So I think people celebrating because they're like because they're happy because they saw this from the start and then it didn't fail is like. Or did fail is, I think is so silly. Like we need to be sort of propping up any company that's giving creatives the power to make things. Like that's as nerds and as creators ourselves. I think that comes with the territory.
Well said. Very well said. And where else can people find you online if they want to, follow your career or, on social media or wherever?
So I have a fans only page that's getting real hot. No, I'm on.
Is Fans Only the right wing version of OnlyFans? What is that?
Yes. It's a much more patriotic, Sean. Thanks a lot for asking.
Yeah, well, since the Quibi stuff didn't work out, you got to get your funding somewhere.
You have to do it somewhere. Yeah, I'm not gonna just beg without giving something back. I'm on Instagram and Twitter and all of the normal places. If you look for my name, you can find me if you're that motivated. And I feel like I'm pretty good at posting stuff.
Yeah, and we'll link to those in the show notes if you're good with it, so people can find you there.
Please.
And of course, as much as we talk about Shudder on this program, if you have Shudder, check out the Mortuary Collection. It is streaming on there now. It's a good holiday watch sometime in the Christmas season here.
I like the one guy who doesn't have Shudder who's listening to this podcast. That's a real interesting next level dude or lady.
If you don't have Shudder,
do?
Becky Slairs, and she will give you like a trial, or she'll hook you up with a code.
Yeah.
What? Where am I getting these codes?
Find me on social media, and I'll throw you like the first month's Venmo.
They like Scare Package, right? I'm sure you could talk to some folks.
Where else are you going to get anthologies if not Shudder? Because no one else is buying them, as Ryan has made clear.
I'm saying.
So, Ryan, we appreciate the time, sir, very much. And again, please check out the Mortuary Collection on Shudder. Check him out. He's going places, even though Quibi won't let him. He's making waves. So he'll be a much bigger name soon, we promise. So, yes, Ryan, thank you again, and take care.
Thank you, guys. This was awesome.
Bye-bye.